back to this piece by Reverend Dr. Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite, who is professor of theology at Chicago Theological Seminary. She writes, now more and more Americans can see that Chief Justice John Roberts is presiding over what may prove under his leadership to be one of the most divisive, activist Supreme Courts in American history. Famously, the Roberts Court has struck down several long-standing prohibitions on corporate political contributions, and in that process overturning established precedent. Now, keep in mind what this perjury-committing freak said during his confirmation hearings, this John Roberts. He would be an umpire calling balls and strikes. He turned out to be an absolute liar. Now, when you lie under oath, isn't that perjury? Aren't they trying to, Darrell Iss's committee, trying to charge people with perjury or contempt? I guess it's contempt for not saying what Darrell Issa wants to hear. Anyway, Reverend Dr. Thistlethwaite goes on. She writes, in addition to my concerns about permissiveness by Roberts regarding religious establishment, meaning, of course, his idea of permissiveness is the Supreme Court gives you permission to be as Christian as you want in the public square when you are a government official, which turns the Establishment Clause on its head. Anyway, she says, given his permissiveness and his narrow view on affirmative action, I also raised concerns during his confirmation hearings regarding torture and international law. I, at the time, quoted from the Roberts papers and commented, quote, the Geneva Convention is wait a minute, let me see here. I quoted from Roberts' papers, and I commented, the Geneva Convention is unenforceable in U.S. courts and in any case does not apply to detainees, this is Roberts speaking, to detainees labeled enemy combatants. I submit to you that the threat of the moral health of the nation of this view is extremely grave. No, I'm sorry. This is Reverend Dr. Thistlethwaite talking. It was John Roberts' view that the Geneva Convention is unenforceable in U.S. courts and does not apply to detainees labeled enemy combatants. And she said that the threat to the moral health of the nation of this view is extremely grave. And yet, he was confirmed by a lot of Democrats, right? So she writes, yes, John Roberts is one of those lawyers who concurred in the Bush administration's mistaken belief that torture is just fine from a legal point of view. As she goes on, she says, in my testimony, I contrasted John Roberts' view of the Constitution with that of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I testified, quote, few Americans have understood the promise inherent in the Constitution better than Dr. King. Dr. King, in his I Have a Dream speech, was able, as few before or since, Dr. King was able to reach into our constitutional past and proclaim the deep sense of the words that the Constitution was a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. King argued that so far this promissory note to African Americans had been returned marked insufficient funds. The promise for King was a dream, but not a fantasy. End quote. That was during her testimony. She goes on, what King understood about the Constitution, and in my view, Chief Justice Roberts and the conservative majority he leads on the Supreme Court do not, is that the Constitution is broad and inclusive, a living document that reaches beyond our current divisions to bring about one united United States of America that is fair and inclusive. The Supreme Court, under the leadership of John Roberts, is going the other way, leading us toward ever greater political, racial, and now religious division. She concludes by saying, I was right in 2005 about what the Supreme Court would be like under the leadership of John Roberts. And I've been proven right over and over for all the good that does us. I deeply appreciate the writings of a professor of theology, who is also a reverend as well as a holding a doctorate in theology, when she or he can make those kinds of statements, like, look, okay, I mean, it's obvious Dr. Thistlethwaite is Christian, but she's talking about constitutional issues here, not religious issues. John Roberts is talking religious issues, not constitutional issues. And I think that is the point of departure. I know it is for most Americans who are not brainwashed by this radical fundamentalist Christianity. If you have a Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court and 4 cohorts, as Roberts does, who will rule that, no, it's okay if they're all Christian prayers, so what? This is a Christian nation. That, I hate this expression, but that is an exceedingly slippery slope. Let's together, over the next, I don't know, year and a half, let's kind of watch what happens as a result of this ruling, where the Supreme Court, neo-fascist majority, said it's okay to have Christian prayers sponsored by the government. Now, a lot of people say, you know, Malloy, the question is moot because in God we trust is on our money. Yeah, well, that's a good point. I think that should be taken off. I don't think it ever should have gotten there. The Pledge of Allegiance, in the first place, who pledges allegiance to a goddamn flag? I mean, I always thought that was insane. And when I go visit Molly's classroom to read, as a lot of us parents do, and they start the day with the Pledge of Allegiance. You know, I stand there and I think, and I've told Molly, look, that's the tradition in the school. You can follow the tradition, or you can just stand there. It's up to you. Well, she decided to follow the tradition, as most 9-year-olds would. They're not going to be, you know, very few 9-year-olds have the ability to swim against the flow of the river, you know. So, but it's grating to me, especially the part "One Nation under God." You know, I was in about Molly's age when that phrase was added, because of the godless commies that we were in a death struggle with, right? You all know that. So let's pay attention over the next 12, 18 months and see how this is going to be pushed for civil libertarians like you and me. This religious crap now is going to be pushed so far out to encompass so much that goes on. Well, the Supreme Court ruled. So I wonder how long it's going to take now for every single courthouse in the South, every single county courthouse and state courthouse in the South to nail up those 10 commandments, by God, yes, sir, and to put maybe a crucifix over the where the judge sits in the courtroom. Why not? Get rid of that woman with the blindfold and her boobs hanging out holding up a scales of justice? You want justice? Listen to what King Solomon said. Give me a sword, give me the baby.